Hello, this is Carl, also known as Zarepath in the custom magic community. Today I'm doing a quick deck tech for a deck that I've been playing in custom standard, which is a custom magic format. I've taken it through a league. It's only gone 2 and 3. Some of those losses were close, but I've learned some things about the deck. I think it's something worth looking at and iterating on, and I wanted to walk you guys through it in a fairly short video. So this is a red deck wins aggro deck, just curving out with some of the most aggressive creatures in the format. A custom core 2020 just rotated in, and it brings several tools which are pretty good for it. The first one here is Barroom Brawler, which is, it's a 2/2 for 2. It has trample. That's usually not quite enough. Usually you want haste or some kind of evasion. But the fact that when it enters, you get this artifact token that you can crack to give an extra 2 power to any creature at any time is very, very powerful. So this works well with your other creatures when you're curving out like an aggressive red aggro deck. That 2 power is most likely going to end up going face, just because you're either going wide or you have some evasion or you're just rushing under them before they get their blockers in. So in many ways you can look at this as a 2/2 for 2 that when it enters it deals 2 damage to an opponent. You do have to work a little bit for it, but a lot of times that's what happens. And so that's one way to think about it. There's also some synergies with this. There could be artifact synergies, which is not something that we explore in this deck. But if you couple this with a creature with double strike or, evasion, right, then you get some good bang for your buck there. So that's one new creature. And then the other is Remnant of Eruptions. And this is very aggressive 1-drop that is also a little sticky in that it can, once it's been removed, it can still come back and have an effect on the game. It doesn't, create a new body for blocking or, it's just the unearth mechanic, right? Which is a canon Wizards of the Coast mechanic. When this enters play, it deals 1 damage. So a lot like how Barroom Brawler kind of gives you almost reliable 2 damage to their face. Remnant of Eruptions immediately deals 1 damage to their face, which is better than if this were to just have haste sometimes, because if you draw this late and they have a lot of blockers, you're not going to deal that much damage with your 1/1 with haste. But here you for sure get that in, and then you can chump and then unearth it on a later turn to deal an additional 1 damage. And when you care more about the damage than you do the body, if you attack with this and it dies, remember that you can unearth it again the same turn to get that damage if you are close to that last point of damage, getting them down to 0. I believe those are all the new CC20 cards. The sideboard has Sonic Wave, which is good against other decks that have a lot of smaller creatures, so like aggro. The tempo decks in the format right now have a lot of like 1/1s and 2/1s. And this unearth mechanic, there's a whole deck that goes real deep on it with a bunch of other cards. And Sonic Wave, that was my concession to those decks. So those are the 2 new cards. How has it filled out the rest? So we looked at Remnant of Eruptions. I think that's the best 1-drop. It has a lot of reach, and you can unearth it for another attacking body later, which matters with the Prestige mechanic, which is from the Rakoa set. Rakoa has been in the format for a bit. Its creatures are good enough that you don't have to completely build around Prestige. There's some debate as to how much a deck needs to focus on going wide in order for these Prestige creatures to be better than like a typical just well-statted red deck wins curve. I think that because you're already trying to hit 3 or 4 attacking creatures in this deck, the Prestige is good. And with Remnant of Eruptions having Unearth, being able to get it with haste from the graveyard to help hit that 3rd attacking creature you need to hit Prestige can work well. I only have 3 of these because it's not my favorite of the 1-drops. It's possible I have too many 1-drops in this build, and I'll talk about that more when I go over adjustments that I would make. And then this is a spicy 1-drop. I say spicy because I hasn't seen a lot of play in red decks earlier in the format, even though this card's been around a while and is actually going to rotate out. And I don't know why not. It's a 2/1 for 1, so it's a Savannah Lions in red, which has typically been pretty good. But we've had an embarrassment of riches with red 1-drops in this format. So that's probably why. The real powerful thing here, though, is that you can use this to give later creatures haste. And so if you've got bigger, more impressive things that can be really explosive, this goes a long way towards doing that. And I'll talk about that when I get to those creatures. But that's why that's a 4 of here, and it's just a 2/1 for 1, that's good enough. So those are the 1-drops. We've got 11 of them, so you should always be able to have a turn 1 play, which I think is important in these kinds of decks. 2-drops, we already talked about Barroom Brawler. Another cool thing about this is if you play one and then later you play another one, that's 2 triggers because they care about dwarfs and not just themselves. And that gets kind of crazy. Like if you're getting 6 ales off of just casting 2-2-drops, I mean, that can get really out of hand. Another 2-drop is Hunter Seeker, and this is one from Metropolis, a set I designed, and it is a 2/1 for 2 with Menace, which is okay. That's not generally enough to get there in Constructed always, but this has a variant of the Slith mechanic from classic Magic cards, where whenever the creature deals combat damage to the opponent, it gets bigger. The neat thing about this design is its counters that it puts on itself to get bigger are actually weapons that you can spend mana to redeploy to your other creatures. So like if you've got good attacks for the Hunter Seeker because of its menace, but you can't really get your Remnant of Eruptions in, or your Canaan War Driver, maybe you can spend some mana to flip a weapon over here and make it a 3/2, and then they can't really chump it as easily with their 1/1 tokens. And also, if you suffer a board wipe or just removal, and you've managed to get in with this Hunter Seeker, then you can redeploy those weapons to whatever you top deck. And if you draw something like a Firestoker and you've got 3 weapons lying around, you suddenly have a 7 mana 4/4 haste. So that can happen. And this has synergies also with some of the spicier stuff. Other 2-drops, Unproven Hatchling. This is the reason to have a prestige strategy in a red deck, and for a long time this was the reason to make a red deck in general, because the mana requirements are so strict. Red, you want it on turn 2. Prestige mechanic really wants you curving out well, so you don't want to be stumbling on mana. This is a mono red card. And the prestige bonus is not just it getting bigger, getting 2+1/+1 counters, which is okay on a 2-drop, right? It's the fact that it gets that evasion that red desperately wants later in a game when mid-range is putting down these big beaters, these good blockers. You have Wall of Mysteries and Clandestine Snitch and Demi's, whatever her name is, Servitor. Well, no, that's not the name. Anyway, you have all of these like cheap blockers that even Control and combo decks are putting down. And this getting evasion and weak fire breathing is the reach that red wants a lot of times. The issue with this is you really want to curve out to hit this, or have some hasty creatures so that you can hit this as early as turn 3. That's one of the main reasons I have Firestoker here, just to have enough hasty creatures that Unproven Hatchling can activate early enough for those few explosive wins you can just steal if you're curving out well before they can get their stuff going. Canaan War Driver can give haste to later creatures, but then it itself cannot attack, and so that doesn't help that much for hitting the threshold of 3. However, if you top deck a hatchling and you already have 3 creatures, then this can give haste to the hatchling, and you can kind of get this prestige trigger out of nowhere before the opponent can really plan for it, line up their removal accordingly. So those are the 2-drops. We've got 12 of them. So Barroom Brawler, Hunter Seeker, Unproven Hatchling, 11 1-drops, 12 2-drops. We really value that curve. For the 3-drop, we only have 1 creature, and that's Tempered Anculum. Excellent creature. Here, we're just playing it to deal 3 damage to their face. In mirror matches where maybe your life total's gotten low and you are no longer the beatdown, but the control, you'll gain life sometimes. But most of the time, there's a 3/3 for 3 that hits them for 3. If it's a good target for Canaan War Driver, if Canaan War Driver doesn't have good attacks because of like 1/1s or something, it can give haste to Ankle Him as you play it, and that's just a pretty explosive play. or just even into an open field. That's one extra damage, giving that haste instead of attacking with the War Driver. And then the final creature, which is kind of a spicy include, but one that I've found to be quite good, is Antarachi Apex. It's a 4-mana 6/5 flying. It's been in the format forever, but no one's really played it because it doesn't have haste, and it has a drawback. So when you play it, it's this big hulking thing with evasion, but it's not very fast, and usually on turn two in these red decks, you really want to be win or like have them so low that you can just finish them off with burn. Here, though, we have ways to give it haste. So, like, this is an excellent thing for Kanan War Driver to give haste to. And if you've got a unproven hatchling waiting for that third creature, and you use War Driver to get the Apex out, you've suddenly got all kinds of dragons in their face, which is a wonderful feeling, and you usually win. The haste is important because on their turn they'll actually have a chance to trade their creatures for Apex, and that's happened a few times. It's been actually very interesting design-wise to play. There's some times where I just play it out as like, if you don't remove this, I'll kill you with it the next turn, and they have to sacrifice their whole board to fight it and get rid of it, which is helpful for me, but not as helpful as if I could have just attacked them and won. So that's why we have the way to grant it haste. I think 4 is a little high, but it's been better than I thought. Okay, so those are all the creatures. We have a very good curve for 1 and 2. We only have one thing at 3, which I think is okay, and then Apex at 4. And then we have 7 non-creature spells. And usually these are going to be burn spells, either removal or removal and face. At least something that does face to get those last bits of damage through. I figure with the Ankylims and the Remnants of Eruption and the Barroom Brawler, we have a lot of ways of just dealing face with our creatures as we play them, even if they get wiped. And the aggro tech that we've been seeing a lot in the format, both in aggro decks and tempo decks, is this Path of Brutality, because it helps deal a lot of damage with this ability down here of granting double strike on your turn to one of your creatures as it attacks. But also this card flow through the journey mechanic. The journey mechanic being when you journey, you exile the top card, and you can put that in your hand whenever you deal combat damage to an opponent, which is something you're typically doing in a red deck if things are going anything at all according to your game plan. So cards that go especially well with Path of Brutality, because even a divination that deals a couple extra damage to an opponent is probably not what you want in your red deck. Like, you'd rather be putting pressure on them with something that deals consistent damage. But it goes really well with Barroom Brawler. You play this on 2, it's a 2/2, you've got your Ale. Turn 3, you play Path of Brutality, give double strike to the Brawler. You crack your Ale on it as needed. You have a 4/2 double strike Trampler that's going to net you 2 cards. Even if they chump it because of the trample, you can guarantee you're going to get those cards. Another 2-drop that curves perfectly into Path of Brutality is Hunter Seeker. So you play this turn 2, you play Path of Brutality, turn 3, give it double strike. On the first, it's hard to block because it has Menace and double strike, so it's very difficult to chump it even if they want. But if they let it through, on the first strike, it gets armed to be a 3/2, and you get a card, and then it deals damage again, and it has, at this point, dealt 5 damage, and you have a 4/3 with 2 weapons on it, and you've drawn 2 cards. It's not quite as explosive as Barroom Brawler, but it's an excellent play that, puts you in a good spot. You've dealt a bunch of damage, you've built up this threat to a good size, and you've flowed through some cards, got some card advantage off of it, in fact. And then the other really spicy thing with Path of Brutality is if you have turn 1 played War Driver, and then you play your 2 drops or whatever, like say a Barroom Brawler, turn 3 Path of Brutality, but you play this post combat, so you don't lose the double strike trigger. Turn 4, you play an Antarachi Apex, give it haste with War Driver. You have this 6/5 flying creature with haste, and you give it double strike. and you crack an ale on it, you have an 8/5 flying double strike haste. That's 16 damage. That is the most win more Christmas land curve, right? But there's a lot of ways you can find value just in the various modes of that and the various pieces of that Christmas land. So even just giving haste to it is good. Even just slow rolling Path of Brutality into Apex and it not having haste presents like they have to deal with this immediately or they lose. And like I've gone over, Path of Brutality is already good with all these other things. Cannon War Driver is already a 2-1 for 1. Entourage Apex is, it's proven surprisingly good by itself. So it's nice that all these cards are good by themselves, but also have potential to really explode into something game-winning, and you can steal some games that way. The last non-land card in the deck is Sermon of the Way. This is possibly the most questionable inclusion here. It is just a ritual from 3 mana to 4 mana. We're mono red, so it doesn't matter that it's all red. But it grants haste as well. And that was me looking for some redundancy with War Driver to get this Apex out hastily. If you're launching an Apex on turn 3 off a Sermon of the Way with haste, that's fantastic. Another cool play I didn't realize till I started playing with the deck was if you have Sermon of the Way and you've got a couple Unproven Hatchlings in hand, you could launch both of them and they will usually hit Prestige, and it's like having 2 4/4 Flying Dragons with haste for 3 mana, which is incredible. And then lands, I like 22 lands minimum on my aggressive decks unless it's incredibly low curve, like only 1s and 2 drops. Draconic Crevice is just good for those real grindy games where, they've removed all your stuff. We don't play burn in this deck, so like, what do you look in the top deck? Being able to just turn a land into a dragon, a 4/4 flying dragon that can I show? Lazzacolo. Let me show you what it turns into. It turns into this dragon that you can use to turn your excess lands into more flying dragons. So if you flood, which is not likely to happen, but if it happens, this is flood insurance. So that's the main deck. Sideboard, there's Amaret, which is a format-defining planeswalker that removes things, gains life, makes tokens, and turns into a flying indestructible angel. Having something that prevents life gain is important for the deck. Shock is good against other aggro and tempo things. I mentioned Sonic Wave. Sand Scald is the inclusion I'm not so sure about. If I'm going against a deck that can remove my creatures really well, I will throw this in for reach. And there's also some really good blockers that have lifelink and have 4 toughness, like I think it's Scion of Empires. Sire of Empires. That's a popular mid-range thing that you've got to be aware of, and Sand Scald can deal with that and be used against that. Firebug was not as good against Amaret as I was hoping it would be, so that should probably change. Anyway, this went 2 and 3. I played against some tempo decks, some control decks, other aggressive decks, and several of the losses were close. Some of the wins were not that close. I think it's maybe a little bit better than a 2-3 record, but I think there's a lot of room for tuning as well. I had a discussion in the Custom Magic Discord, or in the Custom Standard Discord, and some things people were talking about was Firestoker maybe is not the best if we're not planning on going super wide. I'm not sure how much I believe that, but one card that would be good here is, what's the name of it? That's not it. Let me see if I can find it real fast. Flamebinder. Sarutu Flamebinder. It also has a little more toughness, which makes it harder to kill with ping effects. It's slow, it only does 1 damage, but it lets you rummage through your deck. And when we've got these explosive plays that are very A plus B plus C, and maybe you don't want multiple Passive Brutality or multiple Entourage Apexes, or you just need to hit that 3rd land so you can hit your Sermon of the Way and launch your Unproven Hatchlings. being able to... Okay, here we go. Being able to rummage through your hand is really good. And then this also gives you some reach. If for whatever reason they can't remove this, but you don't have good attacks, you can spend your graveyard to deal damage to their face or remove blockers out of the way. So that might be a good replacement. You don't want tons of these because their effect becomes a little redundant. I could see there being 2 or 3 those instead of the 3 Mecha Firestokers. One way I lost a lot was being stuck on 2 lands or 3 lands and not getting to 4 and having multiple Antarachi Apexes in hand. I think going down to 3 is correct there. Another way I lost was by having lots of Paths of Brutality, or like playing Path of Brutality, but I no longer have good attacks. And so I never get the cards. Even though I'm giving Double Strike to something, they can just chump it too easily and I'm not going to get there to regain the cards through the Journey mechanic. I could see dropping this down to 3. Sermon of the Way, I could see replacing entirely. And just making this be more of a consistent, aggressive red deck. And that's one of the main strengths and reasons that people play aggressive red decks is the redundancy and the consistency and knowing that you are likely going to win by turn 4 and by the latest by turn 5. And being able to present consistent threats. If you just have too many of this janky stuff, paths and sermons and creatures you can't cast in an opening hand, the game plan doesn't work. It just becomes a janky bad combo deck. And since we already have a way to grant haste with our 1-drop, which is already playable by itself, I could see cutting these. Now, what are we looking to cut? If we cut sermons and 1 path and 1 apex. Well, there's a lot of different red creatures in all of the sets that are kind of made for aggressive decks. You could go real low to the ground. You could play like Street Hacker, just for a stronger body, but you kind of waste some cards in your hand until you can spend the tempo to put them back in your hand. I think we have enough creatures and threats in the deck, and what this deck really wants is more interaction for the tempo and aggro matchups. And also for those times when we don't get up to the 3 mana or the 4 mana that we need, and to cast our Ankulims or to cast the cards we get off of Brutality or Antarachi Apexes. So I think I just like, I always have to do this, throwing in like 3 shocks, and then, what's the name of that card? It's Crime Bolt. It's from Secrets of the River Cities, Violent Discharge. This is Lightning Bolt, but you have to have dealt damage to them, or you have to have cast a spell on their turn. Having a bolt is real nice. I like that. So 3 shocks, 3 Violent Discharge. The Crime mechanic asks if you've dealt damage to them, which this deck is built around doing, so it shouldn't be too hard to do it post-combat. But if you need it to clear the way, it's more expensive, which is why I like the mix of shock and Violent Discharge. And also you can trigger Violent Discharge by casting, you can trigger a crime on their turn by casting shock and then following up with discharge for just the 2 mana. It looks like that puts us a little over 60. And so then I like the haste for the prestige of Unproven Hatchling here, but I think we can go to 2 paths, but I think I like what path does. Cut a Firestoker, and then add, geez, we were just looking at that card. I'm sorry, I have to look it up again. Flame Binder. There we go. Adding 2 of those. I could see going for the 3, but I'm not sure. And it's possible we only want 2 of the Violent Discharges, or there's some different kind of split of these. But this is, wait, where are we at 62 now? Did I not get rid of... Oh, the Firestokers. Okay, so we've lost a lot of haste. We've lost Sermon of the Way to grant haste, and we have lost those guys I just removed, the Mecha fire starters. Man, I'm sorry, guys. Firestokers. We've lost those. So triggering Prestige is not as likely to happen anymore. But I think this is going to be a more consistent deck. If other experimentation you can do is maybe go for some more dwarfs and see if there's good aggressive dwarf creatures you can throw in here to trigger the ale on the Barbara Brawler a little bit more. Or even just putting in some other generally good aggressive creatures. You can go for more of a burn package, adding more. We have Lightning Strike in the format, things like that. So that has been Red Deck Wins in the custom standard format. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this is a deck that you can pick up and tweak a little bit to how you like, as we've done here, or just go with the main list and go for some combo wins out of nowhere. And I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.